You all know what reality is. And it doesn't have to be explained to you. And if you try to define it, you become a professional philosopher and you will eventually shrivel up and die. But you know what it is.
Welcome to the Alan Watts podcast, Being in the Way. I'm your host, Mark Watts, and today we're going to be hearing more new material on Taoism. This is a session called Flow, and it's from a seminar by that name given by my father and by Charlotte Silver in the mid-60s in New York City at Charlotte's Loft. And together they did sessions there on sensory awareness, and my father would give the audio part, the verbal part of the presentation, and Charlotte would lead awareness exercises and also physical movement pieces that were really fine art, all kinds of interesting permutations of movement arts that she had perfected over the years. So this is a meditation, a guided meditation on flow with Alan Watts. And today's podcast is brought to you in conjunction with the Ram Dass Be Here Now podcast network. And our theme music is by Zakir Hussain, courtesy of Moment Records. Now here's Alan Watts in a guided meditation on flow.
So then I was talking to you this morning about the dynamics of energy, about the way in which we select vibrations, and about the basic principles of meditation as it is understood in yoga and in Buddhism and in Zen, as a process for bringing about mental quiet, which is not pure passivity, mental limpness, just as physical relaxation is not physical limpness, as if you were a wet rag over a clothesline. In the process of meditation, one is completely aware of all sensory inputs. You don't try to shut off your senses. And although it may be helpful, say, to begin in meditation by closing the eyes, in the Zen philosophy of meditation, you don't close your eyes. If you do, you're called a denizen of the dark cavern. You look at the floor in front of you, about 4 feet, and you allow the light to play with your eyes without putting any names on these patterns of light and shade and color, just as you allow the sound waves in the air to play with your ears. But you don't put any name upon it. You allow yourself to be in a non-conceptual way. Now, the importance of this, the practical effect, although when you're in meditation, you're not concerned with practical effects. Practical effects accrue as a byproduct, just as happiness, which cannot be pursued, is only a byproduct of being interested in something else. But the disease of civilization is that we confuse the world of symbols with the world of reality. As I said this morning, you all know what reality is. And it doesn't have to be explained to you. And if you try to define it, you become a professional philosopher and you will eventually shrivel up and die. But you know what it is. It's this. So, we are in a very serious condition in the world today. We are trying to make as the goals of life the attainment of pleasures that really exist on paper only. And the chief example of this is lots of money. There are no limits to the amount of money you can make if you're sufficiently clever and sufficiently ruthless. You can go on and on and on and on. But there are very strict limits to the amount of beef you can eat at one meal, to the amount of girls you can give, to whom you can give adequate satisfaction, to the number of houses you can live in, to the amount of clothes you can wear. You can have, supposing you wore 3 suits a day and you wanted to be different all the time, all right, there are 365 days of the year, multiply that by 3, and that's enough for anyone, with dresses also. Then that there is a real limit. And you would consider, if you were wearing a completely different suit for 1/3 of the day, and you never wore it again, after a while that would become a bit absurd. You might find a favorite suit, one that you felt suited you. What is a suit except something that suits you? And you would go back to it. And you would want that one again. Same with a woman. You find you've got a favorite one. And you want to go back to her and keep her around. See? Then you have a house. You can have hundreds of houses if you're very rich. But you find you have a favorite one and you want to go back. So there are limits to what we can enjoy in a material, physical, real sense. Although I must say, when I say real, and I also join with that the word physical and material, the real world is not necessarily physical or material. The ideas that come out of the history of Western culture that we say physical or material, these are purely conceptual. You see, when somebody says, I'm a materialist, and I think there is nothing but material, see, and all the spiritual stuff is just fantasy. The idea of material is itself fantasy. These flowers are not material. Material is an idea, is a concept. These flowers you can only understand by looking at them and feeling them. We don't know what they are. We see the patterns of energy and the delight of them. But a person who says, well, this is just material, doesn't realize that he's some kind of a fantast. He's trying to say, he's trying to put his personality up against the spiritual people who say the real thing in life is beyond all these things that we see and hear, so on. There is a happy land far, far away. There is some kind of a thing beyond all this. And that's a kind of one-upmanship. People in religion are the worst game players in the world. They're always trying to outface each other and say, well, you don't have quite the right conception. Even among the most orthodox confraternities, say Orthodox Catholic theologians, they're always trying to one-up each other. Say, yes, you believe that your explanation of the doctrine of the Trinity is very correct, but there are certain subtle respects in which you haven't quite got the point. And they go round and round and round on this forever. because it's not really religion at all. It's a form of personal contest. Because everybody in the world almost is challenging someone else to say, you're not real, are you? You're not really sincere. You don't actually mean what you say. Do you love me? Do you really love me? Prove it. I don't think you can. Everybody's going, so everybody's frightened. Everybody's guilty. And everybody else knows how to exploit everybody else's fear and guilt. And emotions, say, like guilt, are absolutely useless because they always frustrate their own objective. Guilt is supposed to make you good. But it's like alcoholism. The more terrible an alcoholic feels about his dependence on alcohol, the more he drinks. The same with jealousy. If I am jealous of the girl I love, terribly jealous, and won't allow her to have any other men, she hates me all the more for being jealous of her. I can't keep a girl by being jealous of her. And she can't keep me by the inverse process. So all those emotions deny themselves. So we have to see that all these games of spiritual one-upmanship, we have to see through them. Every guru, spiritual teacher, comes on like he's got something that you don't have. More insight, more relaxation, more happiness, more oneness with God, whatever it may be. And this is the bait which catches you. Now, there are two kinds of gurus. One kind of guru really believes he's got more than you have. And he can do nothing for you except lead you into a bag. That's the ordinary minister who believes that he is a representative of the true and authentic religion, and that he is going to get you into the church, and he's going to get you hooked on the religion so that you become a religious addict. And so, of course, so long as you're a religious addict, just like an addict on heroin will have to fork out $50 a day to get his connection. So you're going to have to tithe your income or whatever it is to pay off the mortgage on the church buildings and to keep the clergy alive. And that's why they want to get you hooked on it. There's another kind of guru. He makes his living in an entirely different way. He wants to get rid of you. He's got some way of liberating you so that you can function on your own without having any guru at all and without belonging to any religion. Because he treats his doctrine, his practice, as medicine, not as diet. And eventually you take the medicine, you understand, and you can function on your own and you go away. But when you go away, you say, hey, to everybody else, I got this guru, he was just fabulous. And he set me free. So what happens is this kind of guru, instead of having a permanent group of followers, has a big turnover. And he gets on all right. I'm just explaining the economics of spirituality. And there's another side to this, incidentally. Wherever a guru happens to liberate people instead of enslaving them, other people will want to do the same thing. And that's all right. If you're a close type guru with want people to stick around to pay the mortgage, you don't want any other gurus in competition with you, because that's taking away the business. I had a very funny adventure in Thailand. I was wandering around a temple, and I was sort of looking, my gaze was cast downwards, and I suddenly came across a bookstall. And there was a book on the kind of meditation they do in Southern Buddhism. And I said, oh, I was just sort of talking out loud to myself, that must be Satipatthana. And a voice said, you practice Satipatthana? And I looked up, and there was a yellow-robed monk who spoke English, standing in charge of the bookstall. He was kind of red-eyed. And I looked at him and said, well, not exactly. I practice Zen. Oh, Zen, not Satipatthana. Well, I said, it's all kind of the same thing. It's like yoga. No, Satipatthana, not yoga. Now, listen, I said, you Buddhists are supposed to be open-minded and to believe that there are many, many ways of realization. No, Satipatthana, only correct way. Well, I said, you talk like a Roman Catholic. They say they have the only true way. I said, you know what you're like. You've got a ferry boat concession. A ferry boat concession to take a ferry across the river. And a few miles down the river, somebody else opens up a ferry boat. And you complain to the police and the government. Say, he shouldn't open up because he's in competition with me. Now, the truth of the matter is this. I'm talking still about the economics of spirituality. In London, there's a street called Harley Street, where every eminent physician and surgeon wants to have an office. This was years ago. And so Harley Street became completely full with physicians and surgeons. Well, you would say, naturally, they were all in competition with each other. But nothing of the kind happened. They all became equally prosperous, so that they had to open up Wimpole Street, which was the next street to Harley Street. And when they'd filled that up, they opened up Welbeck Street, which ran along next to it. And when they filled that up, they got Queen Anne Street, which ran parallel. And the whole area is nothing but physicians, surgeons, and dentists. And they are all fantastically prosperous because they've got the right address. See, once you've got into Harley Street, you're there. So it's like you're a guru, and you set up in Sausalito or Big Sur or Hollywood, whatever, you're in the right place. And we can take any number, and the more we have, the more prosperous everybody will be. This is the economics of plenty. And it's all based, you see, if you really work it right, it's based on a big turnover. You don't try to capture people. You don't try to make them faithful to you. You don't want to tie them up. But you see, if you do that and you set them all free, you really get them going. That's what you're supposed to do. That's your job, to liberate them. And then they're grateful and they send their friends to you. So, the craft of mysticism you see, I just want to be very frank with you because, after all, you pay to come to these seminars. And in India, it's considered very, very immoral to ask for money for spiritual teaching. But that's a different culture from ours. In the United States, it would be immoral not to ask money. Because in the United States, people disrespect anything they get free. And they have to give money as a token of their sincerity, just as, say, in India or in China, you have to give something else. You have to wait a long time. You have to be persistent in token of your sincerity. But in this country, the hang-up is money. So naturally, one asks for money. A person like myself only needs a relatively small amount of money. And so if you make an awful lot of it by being a successful guru, you give the rest away or do something creative and imaginative. Allen Ginsberg has a foundation. He makes a great deal of money by being a crazy poet. And he gives all that he doesn't need to help other poets. So then, the point I'm making is this. Meditation, you are not trying to gain anything, to alter your state of mind from what it is now into some other state which you think it ought to be in. You are centering in where you are. But you see, the difficulty for us with this is that we do everything. We even eat, we play, we dance, under the fundamental assumption that all this is good for us. We go to concerts to improve our culture, to the theater, to the movie, in order to be able to say we have become more educated. We have improved. And as a result of this kind of motivation, we don't really do those things at all. If you go to the concert to become more cultured, you are not really listening. So meditation, above all things, because it's got a slightly disciplinary flavor to it, a slightly religious flavor to it, is something that people use somehow to get ahead in the game of spiritual one-upmanship. And I get sick and tired of people who go and study Zen and come back and brag about the long hours of meditation they put in and how much their legs hurt and what a great ordeal it was and how good it was for them and how you who haven't gone through this discipline are a kind of underling. See, I've had this put on me for years because I didn't go to Japan and didn't sit around in zendos and worked it my own way. And they say, well, you're just a dilettante. See, you haven't suffered as much as we have. And you really ought to suffer. You ought to put up with those long endurance tests. Now, the reason why in meditation one sits in a certain way, whether you sit like I'm sitting now or whether you sit in the lotus posture, your legs become a little uncomfortable. And the reason for that is not self-punitive. It's merely that it helps you to stay awake. That's all. And if you were floated in a hot tub with supporters in a completely dark room in one of the sensory deprivation chamber, you would very likely go to sleep. But the point in meditation is to be wide awake, without, however, the intellectual chatter going on in the head. And so a posture which involves a very certain subordinate degree of discomfort keeps you awake. Actually, when you get used to sitting this way, I can sit this way without extreme discomfort for at least 40 minutes, even longer. And it becomes natural. But as I explained, the point is to be wide awake and aware of your total sensory input without confusing it with the symbolic world of words and concepts, so that you experience life naked and directly. Experience you naked and directly, without having in your head the concept of who you are as a role player, as a personality, as an ego. And this becomes, in due course, a very pleasant thing to do, so that meditation becomes not something that you put in so much time at, like you might put in time in a jail, but becomes a pleasure. Of course, from the point of view of our religion in the United States, that's almost sinful. Religion isn't supposed to be a pleasure, because it's supposed to be joining with Christ in suffering on the cross. Look, there's enough inevitable suffering going on anyhow. You're going to die one of these days. Everybody encounters difficulties in their lives. You don't need to go out of your way to seek them. So now, there are two fundamental approaches to meditation. One, you see, this morning, Charlotte was getting us to bounce on our heels and to stretch as tightly as we could to overcome gravity. And then after that, she said, see what happens when you don't do it. So one of the methods of meditation is to stretch as tightly as possible, to concentrate with your whole energy on a point, and to use the maximum amount of effort. You say in yoga, there's an exercise called kumbha, which is a way of breathing, which is it's a kind of force, holding the breath as long and as tightly as you can. That was like the stretching we did. That's like those people who, say, in the Tendai temple up on Mount Hiei over Kyoto, who practice bowing. Thousands and thousands of bowings. They stand up, they kneel down and prostrate themselves on the floor, get up again, stand up, kneel down, prostrate them on the floor. And there are those Tibetan monks who do the Lungompa, running through the mountain trails with enormous leaps. And they do like Nijinsky could do those leaps where, you pause a little bit in the air and seem to overcome gravity and then drop again. And they go on and on and on, bouncing along a road. Or there are other pilgrims who prostrate themselves at every step, traveling a long journey. There are people who run the streets of Kyoto, 100 miles through the streets of Kyoto every day at a jog trot. There are all kinds of things like that, where you work yourself to a limit in struggle. Because in doing that, you get a thing which runners call second wind. And second wind in running is where you are no longer running, but it runs you. Where, in other words, the ego energy in the running is displaced and the energy of the whole organism takes over. And that is all the energy of the whole universe when you get second wind. So you get second wind in this fierce kind of meditation. Alternatively, there's another way in. And in this way is a kind of so-called easy way. And one uses it for a different type of personality. There are certain people who must have the difficult way because they don't know they exist unless they're sitting on a spike. And those kind of people who don't believe they're real unless they hurt have to follow the difficult way. But there is a subtle way, which is the Taoistic approach, wherein instead of trying to master and dominate your body-mind, you let go of it. And you let it do whatever it wants to do. Let's suppose, for the sake of example, for a moment, you just close your eyes and allow your eardrums to respond to any sound going on. There are no proper sounds or improper sounds. You may feel free to shift, shuffle, cough, sneeze as you will. Don't try to identify, locate, or name the sounds that you hear. Just let the rippling air play with your eardrum. And as you hear the sound of my voice coming across to you, listen to what I have to say simply as tones. Your brain will take care of understanding it. You don't try to understand. In other words, allow your ears to hear anything they want to hear. And to assist you in this, keep your tongues relaxed in the lower jaw. Listening to every sound in the whole field of air vibrations, as you would listen to music, as you would listen to Bach or Ravi Shankar, without trying to see any meaning. There is no hurry. This is what there is. Well, now, of course, one can do that through all the senses, not just the ears, but the body feeling, skin contact, the breath, sense of smell, taste, and also, of course, the eyes. It's more difficult to do it with the eyes because our culture, as Marshall McLuhan has pointed out, is excessively visual. And because of the Gutenberg galaxy, because of making sense out of print and the enormous valuation placed on literacy, we've overbalanced one sense, which is the visual sense. When we say to somebody, you smell, that's uncomplimentary. We should say, of course, correctly, you stink, if we mean you have a bad smell. But everything connected with smell is repressed. And therefore, because we still continue to smell, it is an unconscious sense through which we relate to each other in ways that we don't know. You take an instinctive liking to someone because you like the smell, but you don't know that. You take an instinctive dislike to someone because you don't like the smell, but you don't know that. All sorts of things, all sorts of messages are passed through the nose, but we're not aware of them. We don't have an adequate vocabulary of smell. Only 3 adjectives in English are associated with smell uniquely: acrid, pungent, fragrant. All the others are associated with, borrowed from other senses. Think how many adjectives we have for vision, for sound, for taste. Although taste, of course, is inseparable from smell. So, the second way of meditation, which I was demonstrating to you, allowing your ears to hear whatever they want to hear. In the same way, you allow your breath to breathe any way it wants to breathe. You allow your muscle, skin feeling, the sense of touch, to feel any way it wants to feel. You allow your eyes to see anything they want to see. And finally, you allow your mind to think anything it wants to think. Let it go. This is the relaxed way. The other way is the tense way. They come to the same conclusion. You go around this way, take the right-hand path and go there, take the left-hand path and go there. I'm not going to evaluate between one and the other. It's up to the individual. But the way Charlotte and I have been interested in for a long time is the way which is natural, which doesn't force things, and which lets the organism, with its own inner sense of what is correct, do it by itself. So, if you will let your mind, alone, you don't try to concentrate it, you don't try to discipline it, you merely let it do whatever it wants to do. Whatever thoughts want to flow through your head, let them flow. Don't try either to get with them and make something of it, and don't try to stop them. Just let them go. Besides, who are you as distinct from your thoughts, as distinct from your visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory sensations? Who might intervene and say, you do otherwise? Because when we get that terrific split between our experience, our feelings, our sensations, on the one hand, and on the other, something called the experiencer, the control agent who has and who directs all these things, there's the root of our trouble. Because we are confusing ourselves with an image of ourselves. And under those circumstances, we define the living organism as a material object, the body, which corrupts and which is somehow antithetical to spirit. Not realizing that the idea of the body as something antithetical to spirit is purely a conception. This is not a conception. And as we see it now from the standpoint of 20th century quantum physics, it's a shimmering phenomenon of electrical energy. It's a light show. This isn't what we used to think of as physical at all. Block, chunky stuff. It's a zizzing dance. It's like fire. That's the meaning of the Buddhist figure Fudo. This guy with a sword in one hand and a rope in the other, with a fierce face and flames all around. Fudo means immovable. He's showing you everything is fire. Just like I said this morning, a flame. It seems to be a flame, a thing that sticks in one position. So Fudo, this flaming god with a sword which cuts off all entanglements, and the rope. I don't know what the rope's for. Maybe just for wiggling. He cuts loose our conceptions so that we can see this all too solid flesh dissolve.
You've been listening to Flow in a guided meditation on Being in the Way, the Alan Watts podcast. I'm your host, Mark Watts, and today we've been exploring a unique recording that is also part of the book Tao for Now, which is now available in both digital and print format. This program is also available on the play.alanwatts.org network. That's play.alanwatts.org online. And there it will come up both as a seminar session and also as a series called Philosophy of the Tao, which includes 3 sessions from the Philosophy of the Tao series and a session, an extended session of the Flow meditations. Again, I'm your host, Mark Watts. This has been Alan Watts in Being in the Way. Our theme music is by Zakir Hussain, courtesy of Moment Records, and this podcast has been produced in conjunction with the Ram Dass Be Here Now podcast network.
There comes a time, you know, when life begins to feel strangely unfamiliar, even when nothing around you has actually changed. You walk through the same rooms, you meet the same people, you say the same things, and yet it all feels as though you are watching it from a few feet away. It's as if you've stepped outside the costume you were wearing, but everyone else still sees you in it. And this is one of the most curious experiences a human being can have, because it feels at once like loss and liberation. You see, the funny thing about growing up is that we think it only happens to children. But in truth, growing up never stops. The body may reach its height, but the soul, if you let it, keeps expanding far beyond the forms it once knew. And the difficulty of this, of course, is that society isn't very well designed for it. Society wants you to remain recognizable. It says, stay the person we know. Don't change too quickly, or you'll make the rest of us nervous. But life doesn't listen to that kind of advice. Life moves, you see, like water flowing through the shape of a stream. And when the stream bends, the water doesn't argue. It simply flows. When you resist that movement in yourself, when you try to stay the same while something deeper is pulling you forward, you begin to feel this strange tension, this quiet ache, as though you're betraying something invisible inside you. And perhaps you've felt that. You wake up one morning, and the music that used to excite you now sounds a little hollow. The ambitions you once chased begin to feel like chores. You go to the places you once loved, and the colors seem to have drained from them. You haven't become depressed. You've simply become aware. You've outgrown the language of your old life. It's rather like returning to your childhood home after many years. The house is smaller than you remember. The furniture seems oddly placed. You recognize everything, but it no longer holds you. This is what happens when you begin to awaken, when the consciousness within you starts to stretch beyond the limits of your identity. The world that once felt enormous begins to look like a set on a stage. Now look, this isn't something to be frightened of. It's quite natural. The problem arises only when you think you should still belong to that smaller world. When you start saying to yourself, I ought to still enjoy this. I ought to still believe that. I ought to still feel that old excitement. But you can't, because you are no longer the person who could. You see, we humans have this peculiar tendency to confuse familiarity with truth. If something feels familiar, we assume it must be right. And yet, everything that's true in life at some point feels unfamiliar because it's new. When you were born, even breathing was unfamiliar. When you fell in love, it was unfamiliar. Growth always feels that way. So the real spiritual challenge is not to force yourself back into comfort, but to sit quietly in this space of not knowing, this in-between place where the old world doesn't fit but the new one hasn't yet appeared. And that can be terribly uncomfortable, because you can't explain it to anyone. You can't tell your friends, I feel like the person you think I am is dissolving. They'll look at you rather strangely, but that's all right. Most of the world doesn't understand this process because most people are trying desperately not to go through it. You know, we spend so much of our lives trying to be consistent. We tell ourselves we must have a clear identity, a direction, a goal. We create these little psychological boxes and then feel very proud of keeping within them. But life, in its infinite playfulness, keeps shaking the box, nudging it open, whispering, come out, there's more. And when you finally dare to step out, you discover that the thing you called the world was never fixed at all. It was only the portion of reality your mind could recognize at the time. The world changes as your seeing changes. That's why it feels like you've outgrown it, because the old framework of perception can no longer contain what you now sense. Let's put it another way. Imagine a fish living in a small bowl. To the fish, that bowl is the entire universe. Then one day, someone moves it into a pond. At first, the fish might panic. The boundaries it depended on are gone. The water seems endless, and the familiar edges that once defined its safety are missing. But after a while, the fish begins to explore, and it realizes the pond was there all along. It simply couldn't see beyond the glass. That is what happens when consciousness expands. The bowl breaks, and you think you've lost your world, but really, you've gained it. Now, the difficulty with this kind of growth is that it doesn't come with a manual. No one tells you how to live when the old meanings stop working. And so, for a time, you feel lost. You may even think you're going backwards, that something has gone wrong, but I assure you, it hasn't. The sense of being lost is the sign that you're moving closer to what's real. Because to find reality, you must lose your illusions first. Perhaps it would help to remember that every transformation in nature involves a kind of death. The seed must die to become a tree. The caterpillar must dissolve to become the butterfly. The night must fall before the dawn can appear. And you, too, are part of that same rhythm. The parts of you that no longer serve your growth begin to fall away, sometimes painfully, sometimes quietly, but always inevitably. Now, people often ask, how do I know if I've really outgrown something, or if I'm just restless? Well, the difference is subtle, but unmistakable. Restlessness comes from wanting something different. Growth comes from becoming something different. Restlessness wants to escape. Growth wants to understand. Restlessness says, I can't stand this anymore. Growth says, this no longer fits who I am. And you feel it not as irritation, but as a gentle certainty. You see, real growth is never an act of rejection. You don't leave the old world in anger. You leave it in peace because you understand it. You see through it. And that understanding dissolves the need to belong to it. You no longer condemn the people who still live there. You realize that once upon a time, you did too. You can even love them more deeply because you no longer need them to be anything other than what they are. And so the world you've outgrown isn't an enemy. It's a teacher you've graduated from. And the strange melancholy that follows, because there is a melancholy, is not sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude that something so familiar could have nourished you long enough to bring you here. Now, this is where Many people become confused because they think enlightenment or awakening means always being happy, always feeling above the old life. But enlightenment, you see, is simply clarity. It's not an escape from being human. It's a deep acceptance of it. You still feel everything: joy, sorrow, boredom, confusion, but you no longer resist it. You no longer mistake your passing moods for who you are. And as this realization deepens, the very world that once felt too small begins to look beautiful again. Not because it's changed, but because your seeing has. You can still walk through the same streets, talk to the same people, and yet it all feels luminous, transparent. You see the dance rather than the struggle. You see people not as obstacles, but as expressions of the same life moving through you. But you cannot reach this stage by force. You can't make yourself awaken. You can only notice when the old shell has cracked and stop pretending it hasn't. The rest happens by itself. The river flows because it must. And you too are being carried. When you let go of the effort to belong to your old story, you begin to sense the vastness that's been here all along. It's as if a fog lifts and you realize that the world is not outside you, it is within you, reflected through your perception. That's why outgrowing the world feels so disorienting, because it's really your perception that's shifting, not the world itself. So perhaps you might stop asking, what's wrong with everything? And start asking, what is awakening in me? For when that question arises, something wonderful begins to happen. The confusion turns into curiosity. The loneliness turns into space. The silence, which once felt empty, becomes peaceful. And slowly, you begin to notice that there's a quiet intelligence at work beneath it all, that life itself knows how to unfold without your constant control. The tree doesn't struggle to grow, it simply grows. The ocean doesn't try to move, it moves. The stars don't plan their shining, they shine. And you, my friend, are no different. So don't be afraid of outgrowing the world around you. Don't try to shrink back into old patterns just to keep others comfortable, for that would be like a bird breaking its own wings to fit back into the nest. Let the winds of change lift you. Let the seasons of your being turn, because one day, when you look back, you'll see that the world you thought you left behind was not abandoned at all. It was transformed by your seeing. The world expands to the size of the soul that perceives it. And that is the beginning of true freedom. Now you see, once you've begun to sense that you've outgrown the world around you, something very strange happens. You begin to notice that you can't go back, not because anyone has locked the door, but because the person who would have fit there no longer exists. And this can be terribly unnerving at first, because most of us are brought up to believe that progress means more comfort, more belonging, more certainty. But the genuine progress of consciousness, the real awakening, moves in the opposite direction. It leads you into uncertainty, into the open, into a place where belonging has nothing to do with fitting in. When you awaken, you realize that belonging is not something you get from the world. It's something you remember within yourself. It's the recognition that you were never separate to begin with. The world was not something happening to you. It was something happening as you. But that's a difficult truth to digest, because we've spent our entire lives thinking of ourselves as little fragments, little egos floating around inside our skins, separate from everything else. And so when that boundary starts to dissolve, we panic. We say, if I'm not this person, if I'm not this role, who am I? But that question, you see, is precisely the doorway, because the truth can only enter when the old answers fail. The mind wants a definition, but life is not a definition. It's a process, a dance, an ongoing miracle of transformation. Now look, you can't pin that down. The moment you try to define yourself, you've already limited the mystery that you are. It's like trying to catch the wind in your hands. You can't do it. You can only feel it move through you, and that movement is you. This is why, when people begin to awaken, they often feel like they've lost themselves. They haven't. They've only lost the fiction of themselves, the story that was never truly theirs to begin with, the identity built from ideas, expectations, and fears. And once that illusion starts to crumble, what remains is something astonishingly simple: awareness itself. You see, awareness has no shape, no boundaries, no history. It is the space in which everything appears and disappears. Thoughts, feelings, people, places, they come and go. But the awareness in which they arise is untouched. It doesn't age. It doesn't change. It is the same awareness you had as a child, though its content has shifted countless times. So what's really happening when you outgrow the world is not that you're becoming better or more spiritual. Those are just words. What's really happening is that you're remembering that you were never the world to begin with. You were always the consciousness through which the world appeared. And that realization changes everything. It doesn't make you superior, it makes you humble. Because you see that every person, every bird, every leaf on every tree is an expression of the same consciousness, the same awareness looking through different eyes, the same life breathing through different forms. At that point, you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You stop arguing with reality. You stop trying to make life fit your idea of how it should be, because you realize it already is. The great cosmic joke is that all your efforts to control life were happening inside the very flow that was carrying you perfectly where you needed to go. It's like trying to row upstream in a river that's already taking you home. The moment you stop struggling, you discover that you've been moving effortlessly all along. Now, of course, the mind doesn't like this. The mind says, well, if I stop striving, won't I become lazy? Won't I lose my edge? But that's the trick of the ego, you see. The ego equates surrender with defeat. But surrender is not giving up, it's waking up. It's the recognition that you were never separate from the movement to begin with. Think of breathing. You don't have to remind yourself to do it. You can, if you want, take control for a while, but eventually the body breathes by itself. Life lives itself through you in the same way. The more you trust it, the more effortlessly it flows. And perhaps this is what growing beyond the world truly means. It doesn't mean renouncing the world. It doesn't mean escaping from it. It means seeing it as play, as rhythm, as a kind of divine game. When you see that, the heaviness drops away. You stop trying to make sense of everything, because you realize that sense itself is part of the dance. The philosopher's mistake has always been to think that life is a problem to be solved. But life isn't a problem, it's a mystery to be experienced. When you outgrow the world, you stop treating it like a puzzle and start moving with it like a melody. You see, the world around you is always changing, always dying and being reborn in every instant. The past, you remember, no longer exists. The future, you imagine, will never arrive the way you think. There is only this living moment, endlessly renewing itself. And you, if you're awake, are not separate from that renewal. You are it. And that, perhaps, is what people fear most, that they are not observers of life, but participants in it. Because to truly participate means to let go of control. It means to trust the unknown. It means to love without conditions, to laugh without reason, to cry without shame. But the more deeply you surrender, the more natural it becomes. You start to notice that the very energy that moves the stars is the same energy that moves your breath, that the silence between your thoughts is the same silence between the waves of the ocean. You realize that what you've been calling you and what you've been calling the world were never two different things. And suddenly, the question, have I outgrown the world, disappears, because there's no longer a you and a world to compare. There's only the dance. When this becomes clear, life begins to feel effortless again, but in a new way. Not the careless ease of ignorance, but the deep ease of understanding. You can walk through chaos and remain still inside. You can lose everything and feel as though nothing essential has been lost, because you finally see that what you are cannot be taken away. It's like realizing you are the screen on which the movie of life is projected. The scenes change, the characters appear and disappear, but the screen remains untouched. Once you know yourself as the screen, you can enjoy the movie fully, even the tragedies, because you know they're not ultimate. You can laugh and cry at once. That's freedom. Not the freedom of getting what you want, but the freedom of no longer needing to. The freedom of realizing that you already are what you were seeking. So, when you find yourself feeling distant from the world, don't rush to fix it. Sit quietly in that distance. Feel it, because that distance is not separation, it's space. The space in which awareness recognizes itself. And in that stillness, you begin to sense something extraordinary, that all your growing, all your seeking, all your outgrowing were never really about reaching somewhere else. They were about remembering what you've always been. You can almost hear it in the silence, a kind of laughter beneath the surface of things. The laughter of the universe, realizing it's been playing hide and seek with itself. You pretending to be you. Me pretending to be me. And then suddenly, the game is up. We remember. And when you remember, you don't need to outgrow anything anymore, because you see that growth and decay, birth and death, coming and going, are all movements of the same ocean. You stop identifying with the wave and realize you are the water. This realization doesn't make the world vanish. On the contrary, it makes it shine. You can look at an ordinary leaf and it will bring tears to your eyes because you see eternity in it. You can sit in traffic and smile because even there you sense the divine pulse. Nothing is ordinary anymore. Everything is alive. And this, I suppose, is what it truly means to awaken, to return to the simplicity that was always here. You discover that the world you thought you had outgrown was never outside you. It was a reflection of your own awakening consciousness. The moment you stop fighting it, it transforms before your eyes. So, don't be discouraged if you feel you've drifted away from what used to be familiar. You're not lost, you're being remade. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. And one day, perhaps when you least expect it, you'll look around and see that everything fits again. Not because it's gone back to how it was, but because you've expanded enough to hold it all. That's when you'll know you've come home. Not to a place, but to a seeing, a stillness that was here all along, quietly waiting for you to stop searching. And from that stillness, you'll realize something beautiful. You never really outgrew the world. You simply grew into the realization that you are it.
You see, most people go through life under the strange illusion that other people make them angry, that the world out there with its noise and nonsense somehow creeps inside and shakes the calm from within. But that's rather like blaming the mirror for the expression on your face. The truth is, nobody can bother you. They can only touch the part of you that is already disturbed. And the more you try to fight it, the more entangled you become in the very net you're trying to escape. Peace doesn't come by stiffening against life, but by realizing there's no one to stiffen. The waves rise and fall, and the ocean never minds. In the same way, anger, irritation, frustration, they come and go, but they are not you. To be unbothered is not to build a wall around yourself, but to see that there was never a separate self to defend in the first place. You see, when something happens, a disrespecting word, a sudden disappointment, a rude interruption, there's a tiny instant before you react. Most people never notice it. They leap from stimulus to response like a spark from flint, and then wonder why they feel burned. But in that small space, that fraction of a moment before the mind begins to chatter, lies your freedom. That's the gap where life gives you the chance to wake up instead of merely react. The event itself is neutral. It has no meaning until you give it one. When someone calls you a fool, the insult only works if you believe in the fool they're talking to. If you don't, the words just vanish into thin air. So the game is not about controlling what happens, because that's impossible. It's about watching what happens within you and realizing, I don't have to pick that thought up. Anger only asks one thing of you, participation. The moment you stop playing, it dies of neglect. To react less is not weakness. It's the highest form of intelligence. It means you've remembered that you were never the puppet. One of the great sources of human misery is the quiet expectation that other people should know better. We spend an extraordinary amount of time waiting for the world to behave sensibly, as if everyone else secretly agreed to follow our rulebook. But of course they didn't. They never signed your invisible contract. They're simply playing their own game, completely unaware that you expected them to dance to yours. And when they don't, when they lie, forget, interrupt, disappoint, we feel offended, as though the universe itself has made some terrible mistake. Yet it hasn't. That's just the mind insisting they shouldn't be like that. But they are. Expecting people to act like you is like expecting the cat to bark because you're in the mood for a dog. When you give up demanding harmony from the world, you begin to laugh at how seriously you once took everyone else's behavior. And laughter, you see, is the sound of freedom returning. Once you stop expecting people to behave like you, another realization quietly dawns. You also stop needing them to agree with you. Because disagreement, you see, is just diversity in disguise. The same life that makes trees grow crooked makes minds grow in different directions. It's rather silly to demand that everyone see through your eyes when their windows open onto entirely different skies. And that's where most of our suffering begins. Not in what people do, but in our desperate urge to make them see it our way. So before we can ever find peace with others, we must loosen our grip on this idea of being right, this little badge we polish and wear upon the chest of me. We are terribly concerned, you know, with being right. It's one of our favorite addictions, the sweet intoxication of certainty. We argue, we defend, all to protect this fragile little castle called my opinion. But what if being right isn't the point at all? What if life isn't a debate to be won, but a dance to be enjoyed? Because notice, every time you must be right, someone else must be wrong. And so the world divides itself neatly into enemies and fools, all invented by your need to feel secure. The truth doesn't belong to anyone. It plays hide and seek through all of us. And the moment you stop chasing it, it comes and sits quietly beside you. When you drop the obsession with being right, you begin to listen, not to prepare a counter-argument, but to truly hear. You find that peace isn't born from victory. It comes when there's no longer anything to defend. So let others cling to their certainties. Let them win, because the one who no longer needs to win has already found the only thing worth keeping. It's peace. And when you no longer need to be right, you'll notice something quite extraordinary. Other people's opinions begin to lose their gravity. For so long, our sense of being right was tied to our sense of being somebody. And when that somebody feels threatened, even the gentlest disagreement sounds like thunder. But once you stop defending an image of yourself, the thunder becomes only noise, and the sky remains perfectly clear. You realize that what people say about you is simply an echo of their own mind, a reflection bouncing off their own glass. If you mistake that reflection for your face, you will spend your life trying to polish someone else's mirror. It's rather curious how much power we give to sound. Someone utters a few vibrations through the air, a sentence, a label, a careless remark, and suddenly your entire sense of self begins to tremble. You take their words, wear them like tattoos, and then wonder why you feel marked. But tell me, what exactly is being wounded? The sound passes, the air settles, and all that remains is your idea of what it meant. You see, the insult doesn't live in their mouth. It lives in your memory. When someone says you're foolish, that statement doesn't describe you. It describes their vision, their mood, their moment. Why let their passing weather become your climate? To depend on another's praise or blame is to hang your heart on a wind chime. Every breeze becomes a storm. Freedom begins when you realize that nothing anyone says about you has anything to do with who you actually are. Because who you are is not an opinion. It's the silence before every word. And silence, thank God, cannot be offended. Now, this doesn't mean you must let everyone trample through your garden while you sit smiling in eternal bliss. No, no. Love without intelligence becomes sentimentality, and peace without clarity becomes passivity. You see, protecting your energy isn't about building walls. It's about knowing where your garden ends and the wild forest begins. You can welcome visitors, but you needn't let them pitch a tent on your soul. Most people confuse kindness with compliance. They think to be spiritual is to say yes to everything, to be endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, endlessly exhausted. But even the sun sets, and even the ocean withdraws from the shore. Boundaries are not barriers. They are expressions of balance. When you say no, you're not rejecting the other. You're honoring the rhythm of your own being. Because if you give when you're empty, you offer not love, but resentment dressed as virtue. It's a funny thing. When you finally stop overextending yourself, you discover that life doesn't fall apart. It simply rearranges itself around your peace. And peace, unlike exhaustion, doesn't need to be earned. So, protect your energy not by closing the heart, but by staying rooted in yourself. Like a tree that bends with the wind but never forgets where it stands. When you no longer feel the need to defend an image, you find that silence begins to speak for you. It's not the silence of avoidance or repression. It's the silence that comes when there's simply nothing left to say. Most people imagine strength as volume, as assertion, as a firm voice that must be heard. But real strength often sounds like nothing at all, because truth doesn't argue, it just is. When someone throws anger at you, what happens if you don't throw it back? It falls to the ground like a stone that has lost its target. And in that quiet, something extraordinary occurs. Their fury begins to echo only in their own mind, while yours remains still, like a pond untouched by the wind. You see, silence is not a retreat. It's a refusal to participate in madness. It's not submission. It's sovereignty. It's saying without words, I will not be drafted into your war. When you stop reacting, the world reveals its true pace. Slow, rhythmic, almost musical. You find that you don't have to win arguments or prove points. You simply have to be still enough to hear life humming beneath the noise. And that hum, that quiet background of existence, is what people spend lifetimes chasing without realizing it has been humming through them all along. When you no longer rush to defend or explain, you begin to see something very curious about other people. They are mirrors, not obstacles. Every irritation, every insult, every criticism, it's life holding up a reflection of your own unfinished business. That's why certain remarks sting, while others pass like wind. The sting only finds what's already tender. So rather than blaming the messenger, look at what they've touched. You may find that the world isn't against you at all. It's simply showing you where you still hold resistance. The people who bother you the most are often your best teachers in disguise. They reveal the exact place where you're not yet free. And once you see this, you stop taking things so personally. The moment someone tries to provoke you, you almost want to thank them. Not because you enjoy the jab, but because they've helped you spot another knot you can now untie. That's the secret. People lose their power to bother you. The instant you realize they were never enemies, only mirrors polishing you back to clarity. And once you begin to see others as mirrors, something softer begins to unfold. You stop needing the reflection altogether. You no longer cling to the role of the one who must learn, or the one who must be calm, or even the one who must not be bothered, because all of those are still little masks, still the self trying to fix itself. Letting go isn't something you do. It's what happens when you stop holding on. Just as the hand releases a stone when it grows tired of grasping, the heart releases its burdens when it grows tired of pretending to control. You see, anger, resentment, and hurt, they're just the mind's way of saying, I haven't yet accepted what already is. But when you finally see the futility of resistance, when you stop demanding life to be polite, it becomes beautifully simple. People say what they say. The world moves as it moves. And you remain undisturbed, like the sky behind all weather. To let go is not to forget, nor to forgive in any official sense. It's to wake up and realize there's nothing to forgive because there was never anyone separate to offend. The play goes on, the actors shout their lines, and you, at last, can sit in the audience, smiling, knowing it was all theater from the beginning. And in that smile, you discover the secret you were chasing all along. Nothing and no one can bother you. When you've stopped mistaking the play for real life,
I once asked a monk why he lived alone on a mountain. He said, I do not live alone, I live with myself. When I was in the city, surrounded by thousands of people, that is when I was alone. Now that stopped me cold, because you see, we have been taught something very strange. We have been taught that solitude is loneliness, that being by yourself means you are isolated, cut off, somehow deficient. We are told that the healthy person is the social person, the one who can mingle easily, who has many friends, who never runs out of things to say at parties. But what if that is backwards? What if the person who needs constant company, who cannot stand an hour alone with their own thoughts, who fills every silence with chatter and every empty moment with distraction, what if that person is actually the lonely one? You see, there is something happening to people who wake up. And by waking up, I do not mean having a nice spiritual idea or reading a few books about consciousness. I mean really waking up. That moment when you suddenly see that most of what people do is performance. They are acting out roles, repeating phrases they heard somewhere else, moving through life like sleepwalkers who are very busy but do not know where they are going. When you wake up to this, when you really see it, something very curious happens. you find that you can no longer be around too many people. Not because you suddenly hate humanity. Not because you think you are better than everyone else. But because your nervous system simply cannot tolerate it anymore. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine you are at a party. There are 30 people in the room. Everyone is talking, laughing, telling stories. On the surface, it all looks very pleasant. But when you are awake, you see something else happening beneath the surface. You see that most of these conversations are not really conversations at all. They are performances. One person is performing their success. Look at me, I am doing well. Another is performing their opinions. Let me tell you what I think about this and that. Another is performing their humor. See how clever I am, how witty. Another is performing their suffering. Listen to how hard my life is, how much I struggle. And everyone is so busy performing that nobody is actually present. Nobody is really listening to anyone else. They are all just waiting for their turn to speak, preparing their next line, making sure their mask is firmly in place. Now, when you are asleep yourself, you could participate in this game without any problem. You had your own performance ready, you knew your lines, you could put on your mask and play along. But the moment you wake up, the moment you see what is really happening, you cannot do it anymore. It is like watching a play and suddenly realizing that you are one of the actors. And once you know you are acting, you cannot pretend that it is real. You cannot force yourself to believe in the role anymore. Your whole body rebels against it. This is why awakened people find crowds exhausting. Not because crowds are inherently bad, but because maintaining consciousness in the middle of unconsciousness requires tremendous energy. You have to constantly filter out the projections. You have to hold your center while everyone around you is scattered. You have to remain clear while swimming in a sea of confusion. Think of it this way. Imagine you are trying to listen to a beautiful piece of music, but you are sitting in a room where 30 radios are playing 30 different stations at once. The static, the noise, the conflicting sounds, they drown out the music. They make it impossible to hear what you came to hear. This is what being in a crowd feels like for someone who is awakened. Everyone around them is broadcasting their fears, their desires, their judgments, their performances. And all of this noise makes it almost impossible to hear their own inner music, to stay connected to their own center, to remain conscious. But here is what nobody tells you. When you are around unconscious people, you do not just hear their noise, you actually absorb it. Your system picks up on their anxiety, their restlessness, their hidden pain. You walk into a room feeling perfectly fine and you leave feeling drained, irritable, inexplicably sad. And you do not even know that what you are feeling is not yours. This is what makes crowds so dangerous for awakened people. They are like sponges soaking up the emotional weather of everyone around them. And most of this weather is stormy. Most people are walking around carrying tremendous amounts of unconscious material. Anger and fear and shame they have never looked at, never acknowledged. And all of this gets projected outward into the environment like invisible bradiotion. The awakened person feels all of it. Not because they want to, not because they are trying to be some kind of psychic, but because consciousness is sensitive. When you wake up, you become aware of things that sleeping people do not notice. You feel the currents beneath the surface. You sense what is not being said. You pick up on the discomfort that everyone is pretending is not there. And this is exhausting beyond measure. Because you are doing work that nobody else sees or appreciates. You are processing material that is not even yours. You are holding space for truth in environments where everyone has agreed to pretend. I remember years ago, I would go to gatherings, and afterwards I would feel completely depleted. Not tired in a physical way, but drained in some deeper way I could not quite name. I would need days to recover, to feel like myself again. And I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was weak, or antisocial, or broken in some way. But then I understood there was nothing wrong with me. I was simply awake in a room full of sleeping people. And staying awake required all my energy. Now, compare this to being alone. When you are truly alone, when there is no one else's performance to witness, no one else's projections to absorb, no one else's expectations to meet, something extraordinary happens. You can finally hear yourself think. You can finally feel your own feelings without interference. You can finally rest. This is what that monk on the mountain understood. In solitude, he was not alone at all. He was with himself, really with himself. Not the performing self, not the social self, but the actual living consciousness that he was. And in the city, surrounded by thousands of people, he was completely about, because none of those people were really present. They were all lost in their own performances, their own games, their own unconsciousness. So even though he was physically surrounded, there was nobody actually there to meet him. No consciousness meeting consciousness. Just masks looking at other masks. Do you see the difference? Real connection happens when consciousness meets consciousness. When two people drop their masks and see each other clearly. But this almost never happens in crowds. In crowds, everyone is too busy performing to actually be present. So the awakened person discovers that they are less lonely in solitude than they are in company. Because in solitude, at least they have themselves. And that is more real, more nourishing, more satisfying than 1,000 superficial interactions with people who are not really there. But let me be very clear about something. This is not antisocial behavior. This is not running away from life. This is not some kind of weakness or failure to adjust. This is actually a sign of health, a sign that you value truth over comfort, consciousness over belonging, authenticity over approval. The sick person is not the one who withdraws from unconscious environments. The sick person is the one who stays in those environments and slowly dies inside, killing their own consciousness to fit in, betraying their own awareness to be accepted. Think about a plant. If you put a plant in a dark room, it will bend and stretch toward any source of light. It is not being dramatic or antisocial. It is simply following its nature, which is to grow toward light. And if there is no light in that room, the plant will eventually wither. You are like that plant. Your consciousness is like that light. And when you find yourself in environments where consciousness is absent, where everyone is asleep, where performance has replaced presence, your soul will naturally pull you away. Not because you are running away, but because you are following your deepest nature, which is to grow toward wakefulness. This is why you cannot be around too many people anymore. Your system knows something your mind has not quite accepted yet. It knows that staying in unconscious environments will kill your consciousness. It knows that absorbing everyone else's emotional weather will make you lose contact with your own inner climate. It knows that performing roles will cause you to forget who you actually are. So it withdraws. And this withdrawal is not a problem to be fixed. It is wisdom to be honored. Now, does this mean you should become a hermit and never speak to another human being? Of course not. But it does mean you need to be very selective about who you spend time with and how much time you spend with them. Quality over quantity. One real conversation with one conscious person is worth more than 100 superficial interactions with sleeping people. 1 hour of genuine presence is more nourishing than a month of performances. And here is something beautiful that happens when you honor this need for solitude. You stop being desperate for connection. You stop settling for performances because you cannot bear to be alone. You stop sacrificing your consciousness just to have company. Instead, you become comfortable with yourself, really comfortable. You discover that your own presence is actually quite pleasant. You find that silence is not empty but full. You realize that being alone does not mean being lonely. And from this place of genuine self-sufficiency, if you choose to connect with others, you connect differently. You are not needy. You are not looking for them to fill some void in you. You are not trying to escape yourself. You are simply meeting them from a place of fullness, offering your presence without demanding that they be different than they are. This is the paradox. The less you need people, the more genuine your connections become. The more comfortable you are alone. The more present you can be with others. The more you honor your need for solitude, the more you have to give when you do engage. But you must go through the withdrawal first. You must spend time alone, real time, not just an hour here and there, but days, weeks, months if necessary. Time where you are not taking in anyone else's material, not absorbing anyone else's projections, not performing any roles. In this solitude you will discover something that you have been searching for your whole life. You will discover that you are already complete, that you do not need external validation or approval or company to be whole, that your own consciousness, your own presence, your own being is enough. And once you know this, really know it, not as an idea but as a felt experience, you become free. Free to engage or not engage. Free to connect or not connect. Free to be with people or to be alone. Because your well-being no longer depends on what others think or do or say. This is what the monk on the mountain had discovered. He was not running away from people. He was running toward himself. And in finding himself, he found something so rich, so satisfying, so complete, that the noise and chaos of the city held no appeal. He could go back to the city if he chose. He could engage with people if he wished. But he would do so from a place of choice, not need. From a place of fullness, not emptiness. From a place of consciousness, not performance. This is the gift of solitude. Not loneliness, but wholeness. Not isolation, but integration. Not running away, but coming home to yourself. So if you find you cannot be around too many people anymore, if crowds drain you, if social gatherings feel like torture, if you would rather spend Saturday night alone than at a party, do not think something is wrong with you. You are simply waking up. And wakefulness requires space. It requires quiet. It requires solitude. Give yourself that space. Without guilt, without apology, without explanation. You do not owe anyone your presence if that presence requires you to betray yourself. You do not owe anyone your energy if that energy is being used to maintain unconsciousness. You do not owe anyone your performance if performing means killing your authenticity. Be alone. Be with yourself. Discover what that monk discovered, that in solitude you are never alone, because you finally have the one companion who will be with you for your entire life, yourself. And that companion, when you really get to know them, is far more interesting, far more nourishing, far more real than any crowd of unconscious people performing their roles. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The beginning of genuine consciousness in a world that desperately needs it. But that consciousness must be developed in solitude before it can be shared in community. So withdraw if you must. Be alone if you need to. Trust that your soul knows what it is doing. It is not isolating you. It is protecting the most precious thing you have. Your consciousness, your awareness, your authentic self. And one day when you have done this work, when you have really found yourself in the silence, you may choose to return to the world. But you will return differently. Not as someone who needs the crowd, but as someone who has something real to offer.
Some people say awakening kills your motivation. That once you wake up and see through the game, you won't want to play anymore. And perhaps you felt that yourself. You start asking, if life is just an illusion, why bother? Why chase goals? Why work hard? Why get out of bed at all? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? To look at the world and suddenly see the shine come off. Like the prizes you once chased don't quite sparkle the way they used to. And yet, that's where many men find themselves. You've built, you've worked, you've carried the weight. But when the game no longer fools you, the question creeps in, now what? Is this awakening? Or is it the end of your drive? But that's rather like a child who discovers that hide and seek isn't serious business, and then declares, well then, I shan't play anymore. You see, the whole charm of a game is that it isn't serious. If it were, it would be work. And the beauty of life is very much the same. When you awaken, you don't stop living. You simply stop clutching at life. You realize it's a dance, a play, a marvelous hide-and-seek between what you think you are and what you truly are. But the ego doesn't like that kind of play. The ego wants medals, trophies, something to wave about and say, "Look at me." And when it fails, it collapses into self-pity. "Oh no, I've lost my drive." What's really happened is quite the opposite. You've been set free from the dreary business of proving yourself, and in that freedom, the ordinary shines, walking barefoot across the floor, watching a leaf tumble through the air, each one a small miracle, if only you pause long enough to notice. Because, let's be honest, what most of us call motivation is usually nothing of the sort. It isn't energy. It's anxiety in a clever disguise. A little whisper inside that says, "Go on now. Achieve something, prove something, carve your initials into the universe before you vanish." So off you go, collecting medals, chasing money, buying a slightly faster car than your neighbor. Not because the doing is delightful, but because the thought of being nothing frightens you out of your skin. Curious, isn't it? You spend half your life exhausted, not for the thing itself, but to shine up this image of me. And then awakening happens. The curtain parts, the lights come up, and suddenly the actor notices the crown on his head is only paper. The whole performance, a comedy dressed as tragedy. Imagine a bird outside your window. It doesn't sing to impress you or to pass an audition. It doesn't say, "Listen, I've composed a new tune, I do hope you approve." It sings because singing is what a bird does. And when you awaken, life begins to move through you in just that way. Not to prove, not to compete, but simply to express itself. Like a tree putting out blossoms, or a river tumbling over stone. And here is the delicious secret. Awakening is not the end of passion, it is the end of pretense. You find yourself falling in love not with trophies or achievements, but with existence itself. The laughter of your child, the sound of rain on the roof, even the ache in your bones. All of it is music you had rushed past before. And a strange realization dawns. The very troubles you once cursed are part of the rhythm. Pain and joy, loss and gain. They shape one another as valleys shape the mountains. Without shadow, light is flat. Without ache, love is shallow. This is why you are here. Not to escape the dream, but to taste it. For what kind of game would it be if you could win at once? Without risk? Without surprise? The whole delight of being human is that it isn't easy. So awakening doesn't lift you out of the world. It drops you right into the thick of it. Heart open, laughing at the cosmic joke, grateful for every note in the symphony. And you see, the point was never to arrive anywhere. The point is that it's happening at all. So instead of being whipped along by fear or dragged about by ambition, a new kind of energy begins to move you. Not the restless push of must do, must win, but the effortless pull of delight. It's the difference between rowing a boat upstream until your arms ache and suddenly noticing the current is carrying you all along. Now don't mistake this for laziness. Play is not lazy. Children at play have more energy than any businessman chasing a deadline. A musician absorbed in his instrument. A craftsman shaping wood with care. A gardener lost in the rhythm of planting. All of them are moved by this other kind of fire. Not the fire of fear, but of joy. Life begins to act through you. As naturally as a tree putting out blossoms in spring. And you find you are no longer the manager, the pusher, the taskmaster. You are the expression. The river doesn't need motivation to flow. The sun doesn't get up in the morning saying, I'd better shine or else. And when you're awake, you discover you are not separate from that river, not apart from that sun. You are the same unfolding energy. And so your doing becomes like dancing. The steps are there, the rhythm is there, but it isn't forced. It's play. It's music. It's effortless. That is the energy of awakening. Not driven by the whip of should, but moved by the joy of being. And here's the marvelous joke of it all. When you stop grasping at meaning, life hands it to you everywhere. The ego thinks, if I can't be the hero, the conqueror, then what's left? But awakening flips the whole thing on its head. You begin to see that life was never asking you to conquer it, it was inviting you to join it. You discover a kind of freedom that was hiding in plain sight. The freedom to laugh at yourself, to stumble without shame, to play the game knowing full well it's a game. And from there, everything ordinary becomes radiant. Washing the dishes, walking the dog, talking nonsense with your friends. None of it is wasted, because none of it needs to be anything other than what it is. The meaning you were chasing all those years wasn't somewhere else. It was in the very act of living, unpolished, unpretentious, and already complete. Awakening doesn't take away your passion. It takes away the counterfeit fuel, fear, comparison, that restless itch to measure yourself against everyone else. When you stop treating life as a ledger to balance, life becomes lavish. You begin to notice beauty was never hiding from you. You were simply too busy chasing something else to see it. You see, the beauty of awakening isn't in having life all figured out. It's in discovering that life, just as it is, has always been unspeakably beautiful. Awakening is beautiful because it hands you back your own life. Before, you were living under a spell, pulled along by comparisons, fears, and the endless race to be enough. Awakening cracks that spell, and suddenly you can breathe. You discover that you were never missing anything, that nothing out there had the power to complete you, because what you were seeking was already in you all along. That recognition is not just relief, it's freedom. It's beautiful because it restores wonder. A child doesn't need a reason to chase fireflies. They do it because life itself is astonishing. Awakening returns you to that innocence, but with the depth of everything you've lived through. It's not naive joy, it's seasoned joy. The kind that knows pain and yet chooses to marvel anyway. It's beautiful because it softens you. Instead of clinging to control, you begin to trust. You see that even your struggles were part of the story that shaped you. And when you understand that, bitterness gives way to gratitude. What once felt like punishment reveals itself as preparation. What once looked like chaos begins to show its pattern. And above all, awakening reconnects you with the sacredness of existence itself. To be awake is to realize that life was never a problem to solve, but a mystery to behold. Every breath, every touch, every fleeting moment is a gift you don't own but are allowed to experience. Awakening doesn't make you abandon life, it makes you fall in love with it. Not because it's perfect, but because it's here, and you are here to witness it. That recognition is the gift. And the great joke is this: you don't need a reason to love it. You don't need to win at it. Being awake is simply falling in love with life over and over again for no reason at all. Like watching a bird cross the sky and suddenly feeling a gratitude so deep you can't explain it. gratitude that the bird exists and that you exist to see it. So awakening doesn't take you out of the world, it drops you right into the middle of it. Laughing, weeping, playing, knowing the whole time that the point was never to arrive anywhere. The point is that it's happening at all. So remember this, you are not here to prove you're alive. You are here to be alive. And once you see that, even the ordinary becomes extraordinary. To live awake is to let life hold you, instead of you holding life. It's to bow, not in resignation, but in reverence. Reverence for the sheer impossibility that you are here, that this world exists, that you get to taste it at all. And when you live that way, gratitude ceases to be something you practice. It becomes the air you breathe. You feel grateful for the good, and also grateful for the mistakes, for every wrong turn that opened a new road. Grateful even for the ones who hurt you, because without them you might never have learned to bend, to soften, to grow. You feel grateful for the arguments that taught you patience, for the failures that stripped away your pride, for the disappointments that pushed you deeper into yourself. And in the end, you feel grateful for everything, for the sky and the sea, for bread on the table and laughter in the street, grateful for traffic jams, for rain-soaked shoes, for the sheer fact that anything at all is possible, because awakening shows you this marvelous truth. Nothing is wasted. Not the joy, not the sorrow, not even the foolishness. It all belongs, and it is all part of the miracle that you are here to live it. You see, there is something very curious happening right now. Those who have begun to wake up, those who have started to see through the game, are quietly disappearing. Not with speeches or noise, but simply stepping back, no longer interested in the usual performance. If you felt this yourself, if ordinary conversations, social events, and small performances have started to feel unbearable, what I'm about to say may ease you. This isn't a disorder. It isn't antisocial behavior. It's what naturally happens when a person wakes up. By waking up, I don't mean reading a few books on philosophy or having a nice idea about oneness. I mean that moment when you suddenly notice that most of what people are doing is sleepwalking. They move around as if on automatic, playing roles they didn't choose, repeating lines they didn't write. And when you're asleep yourself, this doesn't seem strange at all. You blend in, you talk about nothing and think it matters. You care about other people's opinions and believe they're important. You chase things with no real substance and call it success. But when the veil drops, everything shifts. It's like walking out of a dark cinema into daylight. You can try to go back and enjoy the film, but you can't anymore because you know it's just a projection. You've seen the screen for what it is. That's what's happening to people who are waking up now. They find they can't keep participating in the collective dream, not because they think they're better than anyone else, but because their system simply can't accept what it once believed. Society runs on an agreement, a shared decision to pretend the characters we play are who we are, to pretend that the opinions we've absorbed are personal truths, to pretend that all this rushing and seriousness is actually leading somewhere important. The whole play only works if everyone stays in character. But when someone wakes up, they stop playing. They forget the script. They look directly at the stage itself. And this makes others uncomfortable, because the awakened can see beneath the surface. They see the fear behind the confidence, the emptiness behind the busyness, the fact that most arguments aren't about what people think they're about at all. And so they step away, not out of rejection, but because they can no longer pretend the game is real. When someone shouts their outrage into the public square, the awakened person doesn't see an enemy. They see unconscious material looking for somewhere to land. When society splits itself into us and them, the awakened person understands that both sides are simply projections colliding with each other. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending it's serious business. You can't take sides with the same heat and certainty as before, because you know it's all just a way of avoiding the mirror. So what does one do in that position? You withdraw. Not because you've stopped caring, not because you hate people, but because staying in the game demands that you deny what you've come to understand. Every conversation asks you to act as if you haven't seen what you've seen. Every social situation expects you to wear an older version of yourself, a mask that no longer fits. And after enough time, something in you refuses. It simply says, stop. Stop pretending. Stop shrinking yourself just to keep up the act. Go where you can actually breathe. And let's be clear, this is not about avoiding life. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's not running away from the world because it's too hard. It's something much simpler and far more honest. It's the recognition that staying in unconscious environments slowly harms consciousness itself. It's like putting a living plant in a dark room. It might survive for a while, but eventually it withers. Being surrounded by people who are asleep isn't just uncomfortable, it's draining. You spend an enormous amount of energy holding your center while everything around you pulls you off balance. You filter out projections, resist getting swept into emotional currents, and keep your awareness clear while others drift in fog. And no one sees the work you're doing because it's invisible. But it's real, and it costs you energy. Eventually, you realize you're spending all your strength just trying to stay awake in places that keep pulling you back to sleep. And that's when the choice appears. You choose consciousness over belonging, truth over approval, your own clarity over the comfort of being accepted by those who can't yet see what you see. That's when the disappearing begins. The first thing to go is the noise. Social media, for example, becomes unbearable because you can feel its nature. It's a machine built to keep people unconscious. Scrolling, judging, comparing, getting outraged, getting distracted. If you're awake, it's like standing in a river of sewage. So, you stop. You log out, you delete the apps, you stop feeding the machine. And without anyone noticing, hours of your life quietly return to you. Then you start leaving social circles, not with resentment, not with grand announcements. You simply stop showing up. Because you begin to see that most social spaces are stages. People are performing their lives, performing success, performing confidence, performing happiness, performing their opinions, and you can no longer play that part. Your real self has emerged, and it has no interest in putting on a mask. Then you leave certain relationships, not because you suddenly stopped caring about people, but because many of those bonds were built on a version of you that no longer exists. The sleeping version. Once you've woken up, you find there's no shared language anymore. You're no longer living in the same world. They're still speaking from inside the dream, and you're no longer in it. Then comes the career. That's often the hardest part. Because society has tied identity to work so tightly that leaving a job can feel like leaving yourself. But when you awaken, something changes. You can't play along with a system you can see through. You can't pretend to care about things that don't matter to you anymore. You can't sell your energy to roles that require you to stay unconscious. So, you leave. Sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly, but you do leave. Because to stay would mean to slowly suffocate the very awareness you fought to bring into being. Now, Here's the part most people misunderstand. They think disappearing from the noise means you'll end up isolated, lonely, depressed. But for someone who's awake, the opposite happens. In solitude, the loneliness ends. Because loneliness isn't about being without people, it's about being unseen among them. Aloneness is different. Aloneness is clarity. It's the space where you no longer have to twist yourself into a shape that fits. When the awakened person withdraws, they discover something most never realize. They were never truly with other people in the first place. Physical proximity is not connection. Real connection happens only when consciousness meets consciousness. And when you're awake in a room full of sleeping people, there's no one to meet. But in solitude, away from the noise and the endless performing, you finally meet yourself. Not the version you rehearsed for others, not the mask that was trained to fit into the world, but the living, breathing awareness behind all of that. And that isn't lonely, that is coming home. In that quiet space, you can finally hear your own thoughts without the static of 1,000 other voices. You can feel your own emotions without carrying everyone else's. You can discover what you actually want, what you actually believe, who you actually are. This is what I call the hermit phase. And it's not optional. It's essential. You cannot transform while clinging to every old connection and expectation. A caterpillar does not become a butterfly in the middle of a crowd. It withdraws, it cocoons, it goes silent for a while. And in the same way, awakening requires a period of retreat. Not as escape, but as integration. This is when all the unconscious material you've carried for years finally has space to surface, to be seen and to be released. They are healing the damage that came from years of pretending to be someone they were not. They are gathering the strength to stand on their own ground, even when the rest of the world is still asleep. And this is no small task. It is much harder than staying unconscious. Because when you are awake, you lose the luxury of blame. You can no longer project your pain onto others. You can no longer hide from yourself in busyness, noise, or drama. Everything you've buried comes to the surface, and you must face it. No one can do that for you. But here's the strange, beautiful thing. Once you've walked through that darkness, once you've integrated what you've avoided, made peace with your shadow, and found what's real inside yourself, you stop depending on the world for your sense of reality. You stop needing approval. You stop begging for belonging. You no longer need the crowd to tell you who you are. You have something better. You found yourself. And from that place, if you choose to return to society, you return differently. Not to dive back into the noise, but to offer a quiet alternative. You become what I call a border dweller. Someone who stands with one foot in the sleeping world and one in the awakened. You are present, but not absorbed. Available, but not dependent. Engaged, but not entangled. Maybe you help those who are just beginning to stir. Maybe you create art that cuts through the surface and touches something real. Maybe you speak or write in ways that remind others of what they've forgotten. Or maybe you simply live your life so honestly that your very presence becomes a quiet question in the minds of others. Is there another way to be? But you never go back to the old game. You can't. Once you've tasted awareness, you can't return to sleep. Once you've felt your authentic self, you can't go back to performing a part. Once you've seen through the illusion, pretending becomes impossible. Now, some will say, isn't this selfish? Shouldn't we stay and try to wake everyone else up? Shouldn't we fight to fix the system from the inside? But here's the plain truth. You can't give what you don't have. if you haven't awakened fully yourself, if you haven't done the hard work of integrating your own shadow, then you're just another unconscious person trying to wake up other unconscious people. And that only spreads more confusion, no matter how noble your intentions. The most honest thing you can do for the world is to wake up yourself. Do the deep, uncomfortable work. Become genuinely conscious. And only then, from that steady ground, can you offer something real to those who are ready. And understand this. Most people aren't ready. Most don't want to wake up. They want the familiar dream, the roles, the comfort of the play. And that's their right. Your role is not to drag anyone out of their sleep. Your role is to wake up and to quietly make yourself available to those who are beginning to stir. That's why the awakened disappear, not out of bitterness or disdain, but because they need space to breathe. To live without having to constantly shrink themselves to make others comfortable. They find each other in quiet corners in small circles away from the stage. They build small pockets of sanity in a world still lost in its performance. And this isn't abandonment, it's responsibility. The world doesn't need more people reinforcing the dream. It needs people who've walked through it, woken up, and found something real. It needs living examples of authenticity. So if you feel the pull to disappear, if the noise, the games, and the performances no longer hold your attention, if you can no longer find yourself in the crowd, then listen to that pull. That is not weakness. That is your soul asking for space to grow. Do not resist it. Do not feel guilty. Do not force yourself to stay where you no longer belong. Withdraw. Rest. Be alone without apology. This is not permanent. You will return, but when you do, you won't be the same. You will return whole, clear, real. Someone who can offer consciousness instead of more performance. Use that solitude wisely. Do the work. Face your own darkness. Find what's real inside you. Because what the world actually needs is not more noise, not more preaching, not more performance, but people who have actually awakened. The spiritually awake are disappearing because they must. Because consciousness cannot deepen in places built to keep people asleep. Because authenticity cannot survive in constant performance. Because truth can't be found in collective lies. So if you are one of them, let yourself go. Withdraw without shame. Disappear without apology. Stand alone without feeling alone. Trust that this is an old pattern, older than any religion or philosophy. The way every human being who has ever awakened has walked. The caterpillar must dissolve before it can fly. The seed must break before it becomes the tree. And the awakened person must step away from the crowd before they can offer something real to it. This is not the end. It's the beginning. The beginning of consciousness that isn't borrowed from anyone else. The beginning of life lived from the center rather than from the script. And though the world may not understand it yet, it will. When it begins to stir, and when it does, people like you will already be there. Not as saviors, not as saints, but as quiet beacons. Pioneers. Carriers of something real. And that is enough.
If you're hearing these words, it isn't by mistake. This moment found you exactly when it needed to, not a second too soon, not a moment too late. Life has a way of arranging such meetings when the noise begins to settle just enough for you to notice its whisper. Perhaps you were looking for something tonight, or perhaps you stumbled here without knowing why. But nothing truly stumbles. Everything arrives with a certain rhythm, like the wave that reaches the shore precisely when the tide decides it's time. We like to believe we choose what we see, what we listen to, what we pay attention to. Yet, Sometimes it feels more truthful to say that life chooses for us that certain ideas, certain voices, certain moments seek us out when we're ready to hear them. So maybe you didn't find this. Maybe it found you. And if it did, it's because something inside you is ready to remember. Ready to remember that change is not the enemy, that growth does not have to come with struggle, and that even the smallest shifts can carry you toward a life you can finally breathe in. A lot can change for the good in 6 months, not through obsession or pressure, but through awareness, gentleness, and a willingness to cooperate with what already wants to unfold. 6 months, that's all it takes for the seasons to turn, for a tree to shed and grow anew, for the moon to circle the earth half a dozen times. 6 months is long enough for an old pattern to dissolve and a new rhythm to take root. Yet to the hurried mind, it sounds like an eternity. To the wise heart, it's only a breath. So let us begin not with a plan, but with a pause. Take one slow breath and feel how even this simple act carries you from the person you were a moment ago into someone slightly changed. Every inhale is arrival, every exhale, release. This is the entire secret of transformation written in the language of the body. Take in what nourishes, let go of what no longer serves, and trust the rhythm in between. The first teaching, then, is simple. Do not rush your becoming. You cannot bully the flower into blooming, nor scold the sun into rising faster. Life ripens at its own pace. What matters is not speed, but sincerity. When you give yourself completely to the moment you're in, time becomes an ally rather than a threat. The minutes are no longer something to beat, they are something to inhabit. You see, most people try to change their lives as though they were rearranging furniture, push this here, drag that there, throw out what you don't like. But the deeper kind of change begins in stillness. It starts when you stop treating yourself as a project to be fixed and start seeing yourself as a process to be understood. 6 months of honest observation, noticing your reactions, your habits, your hidden fears, will do more than 6 years of self-improvement performed out of guilt. The second teaching is awareness. Not the strained awareness of someone trying to meditate perfectly, but the soft kind, the awareness that simply notices. Notice when you tighten. Notice when you breathe freely. Notice what brings lightness to your chest and what contracts it. Awareness doesn't demand that you act immediately. It only asks that you see clearly. And clarity, all by itself, begins to move mountains. You might say, but noticing isn't enough. I need to do something. Yet the truth is, most of our doing springs from confusion. We act before we understand, and then we wonder why the results look the same. The power of awareness is that it lets right action emerge naturally, the way a path appears once the fog lifts. 6 months of honest noticing will reveal more direction than a lifetime of anxious decision-making. The third teaching is gentleness. Real growth is tender, not violent. The seed breaks open not because it is forced, but because the conditions invite it. So be gentle with your timing. You are unfolding exactly as you must. Gentleness is not laziness. It is intelligence, the intelligence of the universe that knows how to turn an acorn into an oak without rushing. When you replace self-criticism with curiosity, life begins to cooperate with you instead of resisting you. The next teaching is presence in the ordinary. Many people chase enlightenment as if it were hidden in some distant temple, when in truth it hides in the small things you overlook. The way sunlight falls on your hands, the sound of water running from the tap, the silence between two breaths. If you give yourself to these, even for a moment, you are already practicing awakening. 6 months of giving your full attention to the simple will make the complex take care of itself. Now, the mind will argue that such small things can't possibly change a life. It wants grand gestures, dramatic transformations, fireworks of self-reinvention. But think of the ocean. It shapes continents grain by grain. Think of music. It's nothing but waves of air, yet it can make you weep. The subtle is not weak, it is foundational. If you honor the subtle each day, you begin to live from the source instead of the surface. The fifth teaching is trust. Trust is the quiet confidence that the universe knows what it's doing, even when you do not. It is understanding that you are being shaped by forces wiser than your plans. Trust is not blind faith, it's intimate cooperation with reality. It's what happens when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this showing me?" In 6 months of living with that single shift in question, you would become unrecognizable, not because life got easier, but because you stopped fighting what was already trying to help you grow. And of course, gratitude, the awareness of enough. Gratitude doesn't mean pretending that everything is perfect. It means noticing that perfection isn't required for beauty. The moment you begin to thank the small things, a clear sky, a kind word, the warmth of your own body, you step into abundance. For 6 months, practice this. Whenever you catch yourself complaining, pause, breathe, and name one thing that still supports you. You will find the complaint fades, and in its place, something steady arises, a kind of quiet contentment that doesn't depend on circumstance. Now, someone might say, "But I've tried all this before. I know these ideas." To which I would ask, do you know them, or have you simply heard them? To know a truth is to live it until it becomes the way you breathe. 6 months of living, even one of these truths, sincerely will teach you more than 100 inspirational quotes ever could. And so the invitation is simple. Do less, notice more. Stop demanding that life give you instant proof of progress. The proof is already there, in every breath, every sunrise, every gentle reminder that you are still here, still capable of renewal. You are not late, you are not behind. You are right on time, because time itself is your teacher, not your jailer. Let this next half year be your experiment in trust. Let it be the season in which you stop forcing and start listening. Watch what happens when you replace control with curiosity, tension with patience, judgment with awareness. The change will not announce itself with fanfare. One morning, you'll simply wake up and realize the heaviness you used to carry is gone. You didn't fix it. It simply melted when you stopped feeding it. And when that happens, you will smile, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally understand it never needed to be. You will see that the universe was never testing you, only teaching you to listen. And in that listening, the next 6 months and the rest of your life will take care of themselves. There comes a moment when awareness no longer feels like practice, but presence, when you stop trying to be mindful and simply are. It happens quietly, often without you noticing. You realize one day that the thoughts which once ruled you have softened, that the noise has lost its authority. You still think, you still plan, you still worry from time to time, but the thoughts no longer pull you by the collar. They pass through like weather over a mountain. The mountain does not resist the clouds. It allows them to drift by, knowing they cannot stay. This is what maturity of spirit feels like, not perfection, not constant peace, but a deep familiarity with change. You no longer fear every shift in mood, every season of uncertainty. You begin to see that everything, even confusion, has its place in the dance. 6 months of living this way, of greeting each day as a visitor rather than an obstacle, and you will notice the difference not in what happens to you, but in how you meet it. The great paradox of awakening is that it doesn't make you immune to life. It makes you more intimate with it. The rain still falls, the heart still aches, the losses still come, but suffering changes its texture. Pain is no longer an enemy to flee. It becomes a teacher to listen to. And the listening itself is the release. When you stop running from what hurts, you find that what hurts had something sacred to tell you all along. You begin to see that control was never the source of safety. Control is the mind's imitation of trust, an anxious attempt to replace faith with structure. But life cannot be caged. The more tightly you grip, the more it slips. Yet when you open your hands, everything falls gently into place. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stop disturbing the natural flow. You see, there is a wisdom at work beneath your plans, the same wisdom that turns caterpillars into butterflies, tides into moons, seeds into forests. That wisdom does not need your constant supervision. It only asks that you cooperate by not standing in the way. When you align with that intelligence through stillness, through honesty, through awareness, life begins to move through you effortlessly. You become the dancer who no longer counts the steps, but simply moves with the rhythm. This is what the ancient Taoists called Wu Wei, effortless action, doing without forcing. It does not mean passivity. It means the harmony between what you want and what the moment allows. To act in this way is to feel that life is not something happening to you, but something happening as you. The boundary between the doer and the deed dissolves. You are painting, but also being painted. You are breathing, but also being breathed. If, for 6 months, you practiced only this, the art of letting life breathe through you, you would begin to taste freedom, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. You would wake in the morning not with the weight of things to control, but with curiosity for how the day might unfold. The mind would still whisper its worries, but you would smile at them like an old friend who no longer needs to be believed. And in this space, something miraculous happens. Joy returns. Not the fleeting pleasure that depends on outcomes, but the quiet joy of existing. The kind of joy a child feels watching raindrops race down a window, or the kind that rises for no reason at all while walking alone. This joy is the natural fragrance of presence. It doesn't need an explanation. It is what remains when the noise of striving fades. You may ask, but what about ambition? What about goals? The awakened person doesn't lose direction. They simply stop mistaking the destination for the journey. There's nothing wrong with wanting success, or love, or peace, but you will suffer if you think they live somewhere in the future. All the joy you seek is hidden in how you walk toward them, not in their arrival. 6 months of walking mindfully toward what you love will change your relationship with desire itself. You will no longer chase, you will invite. This is the art of surrender, not giving up, but giving in. To surrender is to recognize that life knows more about life than you do. It is the humility to admit that the same intelligence that orchestrates galaxies might be trusted to handle your next chapter. When you surrender to that intelligence, you stop praying for things to go your way and start asking to see the way things are. That shift alone can dissolve a lifetime of tension, and so you begin to act from stillness instead of panic. You begin to speak from clarity instead of defense. You begin to love without needing to possess. What once felt like effort becomes grace. What once felt like a burden becomes a blessing in disguise. In that simplicity, 6 months can become a lifetime's worth of evolution. Now, there's another illusion worth letting go of, the illusion of progress as linear. You will not rise every day. Some days you'll fall. Some weeks you'll feel lost. But understand, a spiral moves both upward and inward. Growth revisits its lessons, but each time with more awareness. When you see old patterns return, don't call it failure, call it review. The universe is showing you what's left to integrate. 6 months of honoring even your setbacks as sacred will reshape how you see yourself. Instead of punishing your mistakes, you will learn from them like a patient gardener who studies why a flower didn't bloom, not with anger, but with curiosity. You will begin to see that every event, pleasant or painful, was another doorway to understanding. And that understanding, not achievement, is what makes a life fulfilled. Eventually, you will look back on these months and realize that what changed most was not your circumstances, but your relationship with them. The storm didn't stop. You learned how to dance in the rain. The noise of the world didn't quiet. You discovered the silence beneath it. The future didn't become certain. You made peace with uncertainty itself. That peace is freedom, not escape from life, but intimacy with it. And then, at last, the mind relaxes. It no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. You see that life was never asking you to win, but to awaken, to participate, to witness the miracle of being conscious, even for a brief moment, in this endless unfolding of the cosmos. What could possibly be missing from that? So, if these words have found you, let them remind you of something you already know deep down. You are not late, you are not broken, you are not behind, you are precisely where the river needs you to be. The current has carried you here, not to test you, but to teach you how to flow. The coming 6 months will pass, whether you worry or not, whether you struggle or trust. But if you choose trust, if you choose awareness, gentleness, gratitude, then those same 6 months can become the softest revolution of your life. And when the time comes to look back, you will smile, not because everything went according to plan, but because you finally learned to dance with the plan of everything. And in that smile, life will smile back.